There is a moment at the poker table that happens to almost every player, and almost every player handles it completely wrong. The flop comes down. You have position. You have a hand with some potential, maybe a gut shot, a backdoor flush draw, 2 overcards, and a read on your opponent. Your opponent fires a continuation bet, and you call. Not because you have a concrete plan, not because you understand the mathematical and psychological machinery you just set in motion. You call because it feels okay, because you have some outs, because folding feels weak. And right there, in that split second, you made the most expensive mistake in poker. Not because calling was wrong, but because calling without a strategy is the same as giving your money away in slow motion. Here is what the best players in the world understand that most players never figure out. The float is not a call, a float is a weapon. A float is the beginning of a calculated campaign to take a pot away from someone who does not deserve it, using information, position, timing, and psychological pressure in a sequence that your opponent cannot defend against if you execute it with precision. In this video, we are going to break down 5 of the most advanced flop float strategies being used right now at the highest levels of the game. We are going inside the World Series of Poker. We are going inside the high-stakes cash games where fortunes change hands in amounts most people cannot imagine. We are going to look at real hands, real decisions, real pressure, and we are going to extract the principles that you can take to your very next session and put to work immediately. By the time this video is over, you are not going to call flops the same way again. You are going to float with a plan. You are going to float with purpose. You are going to float like a player who already knows how the hand ends before it even begins. Most players go their entire poker careers never understanding what separates a great call from a wasted chip. This video is going to close that gap. The transformation starts right now. The cards are about to be dealt, and this time, you are going to know exactly what to do with them. Every decision you make at the table tells a story. Today, you learn to control the narrative. The players who call incorrectly lose in slow motion. The players who float with purpose are the ones extracting value from every table they sit at. Not because they are lucky, but because they have a framework that works when the variance is good and continues to work even when the variance is brutal. Floating with intent, with a framework behind every decision, is what separates the player who builds a bankroll from the player who perpetually rebuilds. The float is one of the most beautiful and most misunderstood plays in all of poker. In its simplest form, a float is when you call a continuation bet on the flop without a strong made hand, with the clear intention of taking the pot away on a later street. But that definition, while accurate, is like describing chess as moving pieces around a board. It is technically true and completely misses the depth of what is actually happening. The float works because of a simple and devastating truth about human psychology at the poker table. Most players cannot handle being called when they are not strong. When a player bets the flop and gets called, a psychological cascade begins inside their mind. Doubt surfaces immediately. Questions multiply. Does my opponent have a piece of this board? Are they slow playing something huge? Are they on a draw? Are they floating me with complete air? And that doubt, that cascading uncertainty, creates precisely the vulnerability that the float is designed to exploit over and over again. The caller holds information the bettor does not have. The caller has seen the bet, processed it, and chosen to engage. The bettor has revealed a dimension of their hand strength. The caller has revealed almost nothing. That information asymmetry, that critical gap between what each player knows about the other, is the engine that powers every single advanced float strategy we are going to cover today. Before we go into the 5 strategies, you need to understand this foundational principle completely. A float is not about your 2 cards. It is about your opponent, the board texture, your positional advantage, and your specific plan for the next 2 streets. The float is always a multi-street play. It begins on the flop and it lives or dies on the turn, and the river based on the quality of your preparation. If you are calling flops without a concrete idea of what you will do when the turn comes, you are not floating. You are just calling with hope. And hope, as any serious student of this game will tell you, is not a strategy. Hope is a donation. The players who float correctly see 3 streets at once. They do not live in the present. They live in the future, and they shape the hand backwards from where they intend it to end up. That is a completely different relationship with the game. The best floats look effortless from the outside because they are constructed with such logical integrity that the outcome feels inevitable. But behind every great float is a player who did the mental work before the action began, who built the plan before the first card hit the felt, and who executed with the calmness of someone who already knew what was coming. The first advanced float strategy is the delayed aggression float, and this single concept is responsible for a massive transfer of money from amateur players to professionals every single day, without most people ever understanding why it keeps happening. The delayed aggression float works like this. You are in position. Your opponent bets the flop. You call. The turn arrives, and your opponent checks. That moment, that check on the turn after a flop bet, is not weakness. It is a signal. It is your opponent communicating that the story they were constructing on the flop has developed a significant crack. The narrative they were selling is no longer fully supported, and now the pot belongs entirely to whoever has the clarity and the courage to reach in and take it. Picture this hand at the final table of a major tournament. The board reads King of Hearts, 7 of Clubs, 2 of Diamonds. Your opponent bets from out of position, representing a range that includes many strong holdings. You have Jack 10 of Spades in position. No pair, no immediate draw, but you have valuable reads accumulated throughout the session. You have seen this player fire continuation bets on nearly every flop regardless of their actual hand strength. So you call. The turn is the 4 of Clubs. A complete blank. Your opponent checks. Most players in your seat check back here out of caution, taking the free card and hoping something useful arrives on the river. That is not delayed aggression. That is delayed passivity, and it costs you an enormous amount of money over time. The delayed aggression float demands that you bet the turn here with full authority, a bet that represents connection with this board in some meaningful way, a bet that forces your opponent to face a genuine decision with a hand that was already weakening when they checked. They must now ask whether their top pair is strong enough to continue, whether their middle pair is worth a call, whether the story you are now telling is credible. And here is the key insight. Your opponent does not need to fold every time for this play to generate positive expected value. They just need to fold enough of the time. When deployed with proper frequency against opponents with known tendencies, the delayed aggression float is among the highest expected value plays in no-limit hold'em for a skilled positional player. Mastering this one concept alone will produce measurable improvement in your results. The most important word in delayed aggression is not aggression. It is delayed. The timing is the weapon. Any player can bet the turn sometimes. Only the disciplined, observant player bets the turn in the exact spots where the timing produces the maximum fold equity against the specific opponent they have studied all session. The second advanced float strategy requires a deeper level of thinking than most players ever develop, and it is used almost exclusively at the higher levels of the game. It is called the range advantage float, and understanding it will permanently and fundamentally change how you see flop textures, pre-flop ranges, and the structural dynamics that determine who actually has the edge on any given board before a single bet is made. Every board that hits the felt favors one player's range over the others. When a player raises from early position before the flop, their range is heavily concentrated toward premium holdings, strong pocket pairs, Broadway hands, big aces. When the flop comes 9 of Clubs, 8 of Hearts, 5 of Diamonds, that particular board does not connect efficiently with an early position raising range. Straights, 2 pairs, and sets with 9s, 8s, and 5s exist far more frequently in calling ranges and late position ranges than in early position opening ranges. This structural imbalance is called range advantage, and the player who understands which range holds the advantage on any given board has access to a float that operates far beyond reading individual opponent tendencies and moves into reading the mathematical structure of the situation itself. Here is a concrete hand example. A player opens from under the gun at a final table with escalating blinds. You call on the button with 7-6 of Diamonds. The flop comes 8 of Clubs, 6 of Spades, 4 of Hearts. Your opponent fires a continuation bet. In this exact moment, you have a pair of 6s, a gut shot straight draw, and critically, you are on a board texture that connects far more naturally and far more frequently with your calling range than with your opponent's early position opening range. You float this bet not out of hope or curiosity, but with full strategic confidence. Not primarily because you expect to improve, but because on this specific board, your range as the caller is structurally stronger than your opponent's range as the pre-flop raiser. You have identified the range advantage, and that identification gives every aggressive action you take on the turn or river a mathematical legitimacy your opponent cannot easily challenge. This is thinking at a level that changes everything. Range advantage does not guarantee winning the hand. It guarantees that your strategy is mathematically justified before any result is known. And a strategy that is mathematically justified, executed consistently over thousands of hands, will produce the results that variance temporarily hides in any single session. Here is where most players get it completely wrong, and this single error costs them hundreds of big blinds every single month without them even noticing the leak. They treat all boards the same. They see a flop, they see a bet, and they make a decision based entirely on their two cards, and perhaps a vague instinctive sense of whether their hand feels good or not. Board texture exploitation floating is the strategy of reading the specific structural characteristics of a flop and using those characteristics to execute a float that your opponent cannot respond to correctly from a mathematical and psychological standpoint. Every flop tells a story. A dry board like Ace-7-2 with 3 different suits tells a very different strategic story than a connected wet board like 9-8 with a flush draw card included. The dry board favors players with made hands and heavily discourages creative floating. The wet board creates a universe of dynamic possibilities. It creates genuine ambiguity for both players, and controlled ambiguity, specifically the kind you create in position with a plan, is the poker player's most powerful ally. On a board like Queen of Clubs, 10 of Diamonds, 8 of Clubs, when your opponent bets and you call with a hand like Jack-9 of Hearts, you are not simply floating with a double gut shot straight draw. You are floating with the entire texture of the board working as your partner. Every turn card carries potential threat value for your opponent. Any Jack or 9 completes straight combinations. Any club completes a flush. Any King, 9, or 7 creates new straight possibilities your opponent must account for. Your opponent must navigate every one of those threats with whatever hand they currently hold. You, armed with your double draw, your position, and your awareness of the board's dynamic structure, are simply waiting to release pressure at precisely the right moment. Almost nobody at the lower and middle stakes games fully understands this. The board is not just a collection of cards. It is a field of psychological leverage that rewards the player who can read it most clearly. The players who read board texture most accurately are not more talented. They are more disciplined observers. They have trained themselves to see the board not as a collection of cards, but as a strategic environment that favors certain ranges, enables certain plays, and creates certain vulnerabilities in opponents who have not learned to see what they see. When you read texture correctly, you do not just make better decisions. You make decisions that compound correctly over time, building the kind of long-term edge that no single lucky card can create and no single bad card can destroy. Myers, if this video is delivering real value to your game, take 5 seconds right now and hit that like button. And if you have a poker friend who calls flops without a real plan, share this video with them today. When you like and share, the algorithm recognizes this content as valuable and pushes it to more players who are serious about improvement. That is how this channel keeps growing and keeps producing content at this level. Subscribe if you are not already part of this community, because what we are about to cover will go even deeper. Before we continue, I want to tell you about something that goes far beyond what any single video can deliver. The Mind of a Grinder Complete System is a collection of 10 advanced poker ebooks built specifically for the kind of player watching this video right now. Not someone looking for basic tips, a serious student of the game who wants a lifetime framework for thinking at the highest level. These 10 books cover hand reading, GTO fundamentals, exploitative adjustment strategies, tournament play across all stack depths, cash game mastery, mental game architecture, bankroll management principles, opponent profiling systems, advanced bluffing theory, and the complete decision-making psychology that ties everything together under real pressure. The full collection is available right now for just $29.90. That is less than the cost of one bad river call at a mid-stakes table, in exchange for a system that will transform every call, every float, and every decision you make for the rest of your poker career. The link is in the pinned comment directly below this video. This is not a sales pitch. This is a mentor telling you plainly that the most durable and permanent investment you can make in your game is structured knowledge. Everything else in poker is variance. Knowledge is the only edge that never expires, never runs cold, and never loses to a bad beat. The most dangerous player at any poker table is not the one who bluffs the most or bets the largest amounts. It is the player who has the most accurate information about every other person at the table, combined with the structured knowledge to know exactly what to do with that information at every critical decision point. The most permanent competitive advantage in poker is not a secret play or a hidden trick. It is the discipline to gather more information, process it more accurately, and act on it with more consistency than the people sitting across from you. That discipline is a skill, and every skill can be built. The structured knowledge to act correctly on good information is the rarest and most valuable asset any poker player can develop. The fourth advanced float strategy is one that elite players use constantly, and when it is executed well, it appears almost invisible to the opponent because it looks like natural, unplanned aggression. This is the backdoor equity float, and it requires understanding something that the vast majority of poker players at every level dramatically undervalue in their decision-making process. Backdoor meaning draws that require both the turn and the river to complete, carry significantly more equity and strategic value than most players account for when making flop decisions. A backdoor flush draw adds approximately 5 to 7% equity to any hand at the moment you are deciding whether to call. A backdoor straight draw adds a similar and compounding amount. When you combine a flush draw with a backdoor straight draw while sitting in position against a player with a known continuation bet frequency leak, you suddenly have a hand with enough expected equity to float profitably even when you have absolutely no immediate draw and no made hand whatsoever. Consider this hand. You hold ace-4 of clubs. The flop comes king of hearts, 7 of clubs, 2 of spades. Your opponent fires a continuation bet. On the surface, you appear to have nothing at all. Ace high, no pair, no draw on this board. But look deeper. You have the backdoor nut flush draw in clubs. You have a backdoor wheel draw because the ace, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight possibility exists if clubs do not come. And critically, your ace blocks your opponent's ace-king combinations, reducing the strength of the top of their range. You float this bet with complete strategic justification. The turn arrives as the 3 of clubs. You now hold both a flush draw and an open-ended straight draw simultaneously. Your opponent checks. You bet with the authority of a player who arrived on this turn with a real hand. Even if you miss the river completely, the story you have constructed across these streets is coherent and generates profitable folds at high frequency. The backdoor equity float is not about getting lucky. It is about seeing equity that opponents cannot see and converting that invisible edge into systematic profit. Backdoor equity is not a backup plan. It is a core component of a complete floating strategy. When you learn to incorporate it into every flop decision and position, you will find that your floating range expands dramatically. Your expected value increases measurably, and your opponents face a version of you that is far more difficult to put on a specific hand. The 3-word rule for any float decision is simple: position, plan, purpose. If you have all 3 before you call, you are floating. If you are missing any one of them, you are hoping. And the gap between floating and hoping is the gap between a winning poker career and a break-even one. The 5th and most sophisticated float strategy in this video is the one that most clearly separates elite-level players from everyone else in the field. It demands the sharpest observational reads, the most precise timing, and the deepest understanding of frequency analysis as a weapon. This is the float against continuation bet frequency leaks. And truly mastering it means learning to convert your opponent's own unconscious habits into reliable, repeatable sources of profit that compound across every session you play. Every player at every table has tendencies that operate below their conscious awareness, patterns they run at certain bet sizes, against certain board textures, at certain stack depths, in certain emotional states during a session. A player who fires continuation bets on 80% of flops is not making carefully calculated individual decisions on most of those boards. They are executing a mechanical habit. They are on autopilot, and mechanical autopilot behaviors can be exploited with precise, calm, mathematical certainty once you learn to identify them. Here is how it works in a real scenario. You identify a player who is significantly overbetting flops throughout your session. Their continuation bet frequency is measurably above the game theory optimal baseline of roughly 50 to 60%. Every percentage point above that baseline represents hands they are betting with, without genuinely strong holdings. Bluffs, weak top pairs, middle pairs that cannot withstand multi-street pressure, missed hands they are trying to protect with aggression. Your float against this specific player is not primarily based on the two cards you are holding. It is based on the structural knowledge that a significant and predictable portion of their betting range will fold when faced with turn aggression. Here is the hand example. You have Queen-Jack offsuit on the button. The flop is Ace of Diamonds, 9 of Clubs, 4 of Hearts. Your opponent bets from out of position. Most players fold Queen-Jack here without a second thought. No pair, no draw, intimidating ace-high board. But you have watched this opponent closely. Their continuation bet frequency on ace-high boards is far above optimal, and their fold rate when called on the turn is extremely high. You float. The turn is a blank. Your opponent checks. You bet. They fold. This repeatable sequence, executed with calm and precision against the right opponent, generates some of the cleanest expected value in all of poker. The frequency leak float requires patience above all else. You must observe before you act. You must accumulate evidence before you deploy the weapon. The player who rushes into exploitative plays without first confirming the leak through repeated observation will find themselves making plays that look clever but have no mathematical foundation. Every concept we have covered in this video works because of a single underlying principle that transcends poker strategy and applies to every meaningful competitive environment in the world. Information asymmetry creates exploitable advantage. The player with superior information about the situation, the opponent's tendencies, the board's structural dynamics, and the mathematical frequencies governing both players' ranges will consistently make higher quality decisions than the player relying on instinct and incomplete pattern recognition. What we have constructed across these 5 strategies is a complete and interconnected architecture for how a genuinely thinking poker player approaches the flop call in position. You are no longer calling because you have some outs and hope for the best. You are calling because you have identified a clear delayed aggression opportunity on a board where your opponent's range breaks down frequently on the turn. You are calling because your range holds structural advantage on this specific board texture and your opponent's range does not match it. You are calling because the board's dynamic texture generates multi-directional ambiguity that functions systematically in favor of the in-position caller. You are calling because your backdoor equity creates measurable positive expected value that makes the float profitable even across hands where you miss. You are calling because you have identified a specific and repeatable frequency leak in your opponent's game, and you are using that leak as a weapon that gets sharper with every hand you observe. These are not 5 separate plays to memorize and deploy randomly. They are 5 expressions of the same deeper idea. The float is not a reaction. The float is a carefully constructed action that wears the costume of a passive reaction. The player who internalizes this distinction is playing a fundamentally different version of the game than everyone else at the table. They are not responding to events. They are engineering outcomes that their opponents cannot anticipate until the moment the damage is already done. That is the game within the game, and it is available to every player who commits to thinking this deeply about their decisions. Information is not just one tool among many in your strategic toolkit. Information is the foundation upon which every other tool rests. Without accurate information about your opponent, the board, and the mathematical structures governing the situation, even the most technically sophisticated float will be nothing more than an educated guess. One more thing about information. It compounds. Every hand you observe carefully, every tendency you note and file, every frequency you track across a session, makes your edge sharper in every subsequent hand. The disciplined observer becomes more dangerous every hour they sit at the table. Now let us synthesize everything into a single complete hand, because theory without application is academic exercise with no practical value. Picture the WSOP main event. 700 players remaining from a field of thousands. You are seated at a table with a player who has been mechanically aggressive all session, firing continuation bets on nearly every flop regardless of texture, board connectivity, or range interaction. You are in the big blind with king of clubs, 8 of clubs. Your opponent raises from the hijack. You call. The flop comes 7 of clubs, 5 of diamonds, 2 of clubs. Pause here and observe. You have a backdoor flush draw with king high clubs, an overcard, and you have already identified that this board does not connect efficiently with a hijack opening range. Your range advantage is real and measurable on this texture. Your opponent fires a continuation bet, representing 60% of the pot. In this moment, all 5 float layers align simultaneously. You have backdoor equity. You have range advantage. You have identified a frequency leak. The board texture creates genuine ambiguity, and you have position for all 3 remaining streets. You call with full strategic confidence. The turn brings the queen of clubs. Your backdoor flush draw has become a live 9-out flush draw with king high. Your opponent checks. This is your delayed aggression window. You bet with the authority that comes from knowing exactly why you are betting. Your opponent calls. The river is the ace of clubs. You have made the second nut flush. Your opponent bets out, likely with a strong made hand or a busted draw-turned bluff. You raise, they call and see your flush. The pot is yours. But the coaching point that separates this from luck is this. Even if no club had come, even if the turn and river had been complete blanks, your float was mathematically correct from the moment you called the flop. Every layer of analysis supported the decision before the turn card was revealed. That is what it means to float like an elite player. The result validates the decision, but the decision never depended on the result. The complete hand is not just a teaching example. It is a template. Every element we identified in that hand, the backdoor equity, the range advantage, the delayed aggression window, the frequency leak exploitation, these elements appear together in your real sessions far more often than you currently recognize. You just did not have the framework to see them. Now you do. Elite floaters do not get lucky more often. They recognize when the conditions are correct more accurately. And when those conditions are present, they act with full conviction because they know the mathematics are on their side before the result is revealed. Here is what I want you to carry with you from this video, because what we have covered today goes far deeper than floating technique. This is about how you relate to the game itself. The vast majority of poker players experience this game as a sequence of things that happen to them. Cards arrive, opponents bet, they react, adjust, hope, and ride the wave of variance without ever fully understanding the forces at work beneath the surface. The players who genuinely transform, the ones who move from break-even to winning consistently at meaningful stakes, they make one fundamental shift in orientation that changes everything downstream. They stop experiencing the game and start engineering it. The float is the clearest visible expression of that shift because the float demands that you act with conviction before you have certainty. It requires seeing multiple streets ahead simultaneously. It demands reading your opponent, the board texture, the frequencies, the equity, and the timing all at once, and synthesizing them into a single, clear decision. It requires playing the player as much as the cards, and sometimes more than the cards. That combination of skills is not something most players ever build, because most players never decide that the game deserves that level of attention and study. You are not most players. The 10 ebooks in the Mind of a Grinder Complete System, available for $29.90 through the link in the pinned comment, will take everything you learned today to a depth that no single video can match. 10 complete books covering every dimension of what it takes to think and play at the highest level. Every float strategy, every decision framework, every mental game principle you need to turn this knowledge into consistent, compounding results at the table. The link is in the pinned comment. Use it, and then sit down at your next session with new eyes, a clearer mind, and the complete understanding that every call you make from this moment forward is either a weapon or a donation. You now know how to make it a weapon. Decisions make champions, and your decisions start right here. The player who finishes this video and immediately returns to old habits has learned information. The player who finishes this video and commits to applying even one of these 5 strategies in their very next session has begun a transformation. Information without application is trivia. Knowledge applied under pressure is power. Share this video with one player who needs it. Help them see what you now see. The community of thinking poker players grows stronger every time one more person decides to play the game instead of just playing the cards.